Welcome, everyone. It is a real pleasure to have you all this evening. My name is Will Barbie, and I am the student president of the William F. Buckley Jr. program. Before I begin, I just would like to make a few logistical announcements outlining the order of events for the evening. We will begin in a few moments with a lecture from our prize winner, Dr. Schillinger, before going into a Q&A session with our audience. Afterwards, I invite you all to join us at a reception towards the back of the room where we will continue the conversation with each other over light refreshments. In addition, I wanted to mention that this lecture is being live streamed and recorded so that our viewers at home can enjoy the pleasure of hearing from Dr. Schillinger. So keep the protesting to a minimum. I would like to begin with a few words about the Buckley program and the Lux at Veritas Faculty Prize. For nearly 15 years, the William F. Buckley Jr. program has served as an organization dedicated to promoting free speech and intellectual diversity at Yale. Over the years, our efforts have created new, robust spaces for students to engage with one another in open, respectful dialogue on a range of complex issues and ideas. However, we at Buckley realized that improving the free speech environment at Yale would take more than just working with the student body. We saw that for real change to take place, some professorial leadership would be required to lead the charge into the classrooms and faculty lounges. To accomplish these goals, we launched the Lux at Veritas Faculty Prize in 2022. This prize recognizes a Yale faculty member who actively fosters intellectual diversity for students inside and outside of the classroom, a professor who goes above and beyond to promote engagement in good faith with different points of view and respectful discourse among students, an educator who creates a classroom environment where students feel comfortable expressing their thoughts and ideas openly, a teacher who cultivates the skill of genuine critical thinking in students. Earlier this year, we asked students, faculty, and alumni to nominate Yale faculty who best represent what we're looking for in our Lux at Veritas Faculty Prize honorees. After receiving nominations for 54 different faculty across Yale College and several of the graduate schools, a panel of judges selected a winner who stood out for promoting debate and discussion in the classroom, good faith engagement with differing opinions, and for encouraging students to think critically about the ideas that matter. It is my pleasure to announce that the winner of the 4th annual Lux at Veritas Faculty Prize is Dr. Daniel Schillinger. A famous Yale graduate once said that his only regret in life was that he had but one life to give for his country. During my Yale experience, my only regret is I did not have but one class to give to Dr. Dan Schillinger. Some may consider that to be a tall claim. However, let the 13 nominations that Dr. Schillinger received speak for themselves. Quote, "He encourages students to try on different perspectives," a recent graduate wrote, "and when no one is willing to argue against a point, Professor Schillinger takes on the dissident perspective. He, quote, sees the value in every viewpoint and encourages us to provide deep, thoughtful, and unique contributions to the conversation," wrote one student who has taken 3 of Dr. Schillinger's classes, ranging from survey explorations of Greek tragedies to comparisons of the philosophies of Kant and Aristotle to a deep dive into Hobbes's Leviathan. Quote, "Professor Schillinger's exemplary teaching in the Directed Studies program," writes a departmental colleague, "demonstrates his view that political ideology should not and need not foreclose an appreciation of the inherited wisdom of Western civilization." Suffice it to say that the values Professor Schillinger exemplifies align themselves with the mission of the Buckley program. We are proud to celebrate educators who make an extra effort to support real learning in the classroom. By respecting different points of view and encouraging students to do the same, by defending open debate and discussion, and by imbuing in the student body an appreciation for truth and the integrity it requires, the Lux at Veritas Faculty Prize winners help Yale realize the true purpose of education. Dr. Daniel Schillinger does just that, which is why I'm delighted to award the 2025 Lux et Veritas Faculty Prize, including this commemorative plaque and $10,000 prize to Daniel Schillinger.
Well, thank you, Will, for that generous introduction. And thank you to the Buckley Institute, to Lauren and Moe and Kyle and Ari, who helped to organize this event. Thanks to you all for coming. I'm moved to see so many friends and family and students. Yeah, it's an honor and a delight to receive this award, and a surprise. Imagine opening your email to find out of the blue extremely kind words from colleagues and students and a significant prize attached to them. It's probably good that messages like that don't come my way very often, otherwise I'd check my email more than I already do. My surprise at having been selected runs even a bit deeper. Since the prize honors a faculty member who, quote, goes above and beyond to facilitate open discussion and debate in the classroom, creating an environment in which all perspectives are welcome, I can't help but wonder whether that's what I do. Don't I just teach the great books, these fundamental texts and questions that I love? It's not as if in my seminars we debate hot-button political issues. Years ago, in an interview for a job at another university, a search committee member asked me, how do you encourage your students to talk about things like race, gun control, or abortion in the classroom? And I blurted out, I don't. In fact, if that happens in a seminar on great books, the conversation has gone off the rails. Needless to say, I didn't get that job. Still, I do think that there's something conducive to freedom of thought and expression in the work of education as I do it, which is not for nothing called liberal education, small l. Again, I'm honored to receive this award, and to the extent that I'm surprised or puzzled, I want to think about why. What is liberal education today? That's the title that I've given to these reflections, and that's the question that motivates them. Two caveats before I really get into it. It'll be easier for me to say what liberal education isn't than to say what it is. I'm going to offer a series of theses or points about liberal education. Each will be couched in the negative. The second caveat is that liberal education, as I will describe it, is in no way mine. It's a tradition that I have inherited. Some of you may notice that the title of this talk, What is Liberal Education Today, is just the title of Leo Strauss's essay, What is Liberal Education, with the little word today appended to it. Eventually, I'll have to address the present, the today, if only to identify threats to liberal education. Its nature, to my mind, hasn't changed. Okay, so the first thesis, liberal education is liberal because it's not narrowly practical. Why is liberal education called liberal education? Not because of the tradition of political liberalism. John Locke didn't invent liberal education, never mind John Rawls. Liberal education is way older. It harkens back to ancient Greece, especially to Aristotle. In his own words, drawn from Book 8 of the Politics, where Aristotle outlines the kind of education appropriate for the young in his imagined best regime, quote, that it is necessary, therefore, to be taught the necessary things among the useful arts is clear, but not all such things. Since the free tasks are distinguished from the unfree, clearly it is also necessary to share in as many of the useful arts as will make the sharer not merely mechanical. A mechanical task must be considered in this way, that is, as being unfree, And likewise, an art or a kind of learning must be considered unfree, which, with respect to the uses and the activities of the virtues, renders useless the bodies, souls, and minds of the free. I hope my overly literal and clunky translation highlights Aristotle's main point. Liberal education stands against education that is vocational, narrowly technical or mechanical, utilitarian. Liberal education aims to cultivate virtue, especially intellectual virtue, rather than to be merely useful. The wrong question to ask about liberal education is, what does it get me? To students who ask this question, I'm tempted to respond. When you make a friend, or when you fall in love, or when you listen to a beautiful piece of music, do you ask, what does it get me? According to one story, maybe apocryphal, a student of the ancient Greek mathematician Euclid asked him this very question, what does it get me? After some time doing mathematics, and Euclid turned to the other guys in the room and said something like, can someone give this guy a few bucks so he doesn't feel that he's wasted his time here? Talking to academic advisees, trying to persuade them to major in humanities, I can sometimes see that they want to ask the question, what does it get me, even if they refrain. Some of them seem to regard my suggestion that they major in humanities as if I'd said, why don't you learn to repair grandfather clocks? To insist on the question about gain is, in fact, to have answered the question of education's end from a certain perspective, a distinctly modern one, according to which thinking must be for the sake of acting, theory must be for the sake of practice. The conversation of liberal education is, from this perspective, utopian, quixotic, because liberal education does not teach, in the words of Machiavelli, the effectual truth, the truth that is most powerful, the truth that gets you what you want, the truth that works out in the real world. For sure, liberal education isn't the way to fame or power or wealth. It is the way, rather, to figure out whether you want these things, whether a life devoted to their pursuit would be a good life. As one scholar says of Aristotle, and the same could be said of Plato and his Socrates, Aristotle teaches the questions that arise when one inquires into what a human being is and how he or she should act. Questions about nature, the virtues, beauty, politics, contemplation, and friendship. If we're in a darker mood, questions about death, suffering, war, self-deception, and injustice, which are no less fundamental. While these questions are intoxicatingly theoretical, they're also practical. As we act in the world, we can't help but imply answers, however unreflectively. Paradoxically, a narrow focus on utility can stunt our souls and minds. By contrast, forgetting the useful, at least for a second, can allow souls and minds to grow. And in this way, liberal education may be very useful after all. Okay, that was thesis number one, that liberal education is not narrowly practical. The second, liberal education is liberal because it's not specifically political. This is the primary misconception about liberal education, that the liberal in liberal education refers to the exercise of political freedom. On this view, liberal education teaches citizens how to exercise their freedom well. That's not to say that liberal education produces bad citizens. Thoughtful people may, on balance, be better citizens. But good citizenship can only be an accidental byproduct of liberal education's main task, to develop the souls of students, their ethical and especially their intellectual capacities, irrespective of any political agenda. When viewed from the perspective of contemporary American politics, the great books are utterly heterodox. Consider, for example, Plato's Socrates. Socrates as a kind of aristocrat in his continuous thinking about the human virtues, wisdom chief among them. But then again, he's also a kind of collectivist when it comes to property arrangements in political life. He's a fan of sharing, he disdains money-making, he lives by choice in abject poverty. And he's a trenchant critic of manliness and bellicosity. He likens his own activity not to war, but to midwifery. He claims to have learned many of the most important things from a woman named Diotima. So he's an aristocratic socialist feminist. Those labels don't work, of course, but the point is that no labels associated with contemporary political perspectives will work. In addition, Socrates is a critic of his own regime, democratic Athens. He asks his fellow Athenians why they care about money and power more than their own souls, why they respect knowledge in the arts but disavow its possibility in politics, why they claim to be just citizens but are attracted to tyranny, to empire. If civic education aims primarily at sympathetic understanding and perhaps improvement of the regime in which one lives, Socrates isn't doing civic education, at least not primarily. Not deliberation about what is best for democratic Athens, but dialectical inquiry into the best regime, which means questioning every extant regime. That's the overarching project of Socratic political philosophy. And reading Plato, aren't we trying to do something similar ourselves? On this point, another anecdote. This is a chance for me to tell some of my good stories. I recently had coffee with a high school friend who'd read some Curtis Yarvin, and he told me confidently that there was no way I was thinking about truly dangerous questions at Yale. His example, did I ever ask my students about the desirability of monarchy as a regime type? I was baffled. It'd be easier to count the directed studies texts that don't take up this question. Is it preferable to be ruled by good laws or by one extraordinarily wise and decent person? That's a question raised and carefully examined by both Plato and Aristotle, to whom the edgelords allude, but whom they barely understand. Great Books education is, in a sense, radical and subversive because it looks beyond our politics and its intellectual foundations. The staid or traditional way to approach undergrad education today would be to begin, without a second thought, to study microeconomics. Sorry, econ majors. I love many of you. But okay, that was the second thesis. Liberal education is liberal because it's not specifically political or civic. The third thesis, liberal education is liberal because it's not compulsory. For my purposes as a teacher, this aspect of liberal education, its voluntariness, may be the most important. At the start of my first directed studies seminar each year, I tell the students that whatever were to happen in my life, I would continue to read these books. If at some point in the future I no longer have an academic job, I will still read and write on the books that I love most, especially works of ancient Greek political thought, philosophy, and literature. I want to read these books day and night. And I see my infant asleep in the day back there, so maybe I'll get to read some of them tonight. I'm not sure, to be honest, that I give my students anything more than this. Genuine and shameless love of these books and encouragement to talk through them in an atmosphere of freedom and enthusiasm. There is something amateurish in a good way about this approach. Donald Kagan, whom it's appropriate, I think, to invoke here, called his style of reading Greek history not the higher criticism, but the higher naivete, because he accepted everything Herodotus and Thucydides told him unless the texts or outside evidence made him doubt them. Taking inspiration from Kagan, can I call Great Books education, as I do it, as many of us do it, the higher amateurism? We readers of great books tend to be self-admitted amateurs because we do it of ourselves, because we refuse to specialize, and because we're all relative novices when we're reading the likes of Plato or Nietzsche. The higher amateurism is evident in directed studies. No student must take directed studies. Likewise, the faculty mostly choose to teach it, even though the reading list exceeds our scholarly expertise and challenges us more than our familiar material. At Yale, and at my home away from home, Deep Springs College, reading groups proliferate. The same students and faculty who choose to do directed studies on Deep Springs, rigorous as those programs already are, also read and talk about books on the side, organizing their own seminars, in effect. Why? Because they crave a kind of liberation in their thinking, because even as young people, they sense that they do not have infinite time, best to read the good stuff right now, and because they're trying to discipline themselves to do the hard work of interpretation with others who are similarly keen. They're forcing themselves to be free. That formulation comes from Rousseau, but listen to Nietzsche writing in his early essay, Schopenhauer as Educator, on voluntariness and compulsion in education. I'm quoting him now. Your true educators and molders reveal to you the true original meaning and basic stuff of your nature, something absolutely incapable of being educated and molded, but in any case, something fettered and paralyzed and difficult of access. Your teachers can be nobody but your liberators, and that's the secret of all education. It does not provide artificial limbs, wax noses, or corrective lenses. On the contrary, what might provide such things is merely a parody of education. Education is rather liberation, the clearing away of all weeds, rubble, and vermin that might harm the delicate shoots, a radiance of light and warmth, the kind rustling fall of rain at night. It is imitation and adoration of nature, where nature is maternal and mercifully minded. It is perfection of nature when it prevents nature's fits of cruelty and mercilessness and converts them to good, when it throws a veil over nature's stepmotherly disposition and sad incomprehension. A true teacher, according to Nietzsche, has, in the first place, a negative aim: to clear the ground, to liberate excellent natures from the many downward drags on their intellectual flourishing. Such teachers don't try to give students capacities they don't have, those artificial limbs and wax noses and corrective lenses. I love that line. True, the perfection of latent capacities often requires some artifice or compulsion, some pruning, support, or grafting, as in the case of plants. But these artificial means help the plant to become what it most fully is, to realize its final flowering form, which is entirely its own. All right, that was the third of 4 theses on liberal education not being compulsory. This is the 4th. Liberal education is neither simply communal nor simply solitary, and for this reason it must be textual. This last thesis is the sketchiest. On one hand, those of us who love liberal education really love certain communities that make good seminars possible. Directed study seminars and Deep Springs seminars, rooted in their respective communities, are way better than those comprised of relative strangers. On the other hand, is it true that our best thinking always happens in community with others? Don't we sometimes need to think alone? Aren't our written thoughts our most precise and considered thoughts? Through careful reading in seminar and through careful writing in solitude, practitioners of liberal education can have it both ways. Liberal education takes its bearings from one or more texts. In seminar, the text sits in front of us. Together, we try to interpret it. In agreement or disagreement, we refer to it. It is our res publica, our public thing. Outside seminar, each of us can judge the conversation, our own ideas and those of others, against the text, which remains stubbornly itself, not the property of the community. This give and take between communal conversation and solitary reflection, with the text in the middle, reminds me of a summer afternoon at Deep Springs. After an especially laborious session on Hannah Arendt's The Human Condition, which had gone badly, in my view, I asked one of my best students what he'd thought. He said that the seminar was great. To his mind, we took no shortcuts through or away from the text. Instead, we lingered in the weeds, the thorns, and the most difficult passages. And if we ended up stuck, well, there was the night to chart a way forward by ourselves, and then in the morning, we'd be back at it as a group. In short, when we take the text as our only authority, it's possible to submit entirely to the community in seminar, even to be affected and changed by that community, but also to return to the text and to oneself through solitary thinking and writing. How the individual should relate to the community is a question embedded in the practices of liberal education, and no easy answers are offered. Okay. Those were the 4 theses. The conclusion, now I have to say something about today, liberal education today. In my directed studies seminars, during the last class of the semester, I told you what I do during the first class. Well, this is what I do during the last. I like to ask the students to reflect on what we're doing in DS. Why read the great books? One excellent student, I don't think she's in the room. That's okay. One excellent student related what she had been told by a source she didn't name. This wasn't her view, she said, but still she aired it, that DS students read Augustine, her example, so that when they're at a cocktail party in 10 years and someone mentions Augustine, they'll have something to say about him. She didn't really believe this, but she wanted to hear me respond to it. I said 2 things. First, I said that maybe she hasn't been to many cocktail parties because no one will want to talk about St. Augustine. Second, I told her that at Deep Springs a few years back, a seminar was offered on Augustine, after which a student began the process of conversion to Catholicism. While you don't need to be a Catholic or a potential Catholic to read Augustine, why not suppose that we read the great books because our souls are at stake? We want to know about the whole of things, and especially about the little part that is a human life while we're here. Liberal education is imperiled by whoever told my student that directed studies will be good for cocktail parties, by our unwillingness, or at least the unwillingness of certain adults, to think seriously in the company of the students about what education is for. The students learn from these adults that their education is a kind of game that precedes the serious business of money and politics. No doubt the federal government is not helping by politicizing the university still further, by policing speech and levying fines. This attack has made university administrators pinch pennies. At the same time, you could say that some of these administrators paved the way for the government's attack by transforming their universities into corporations where administrators outnumber faculty and endowments swell, even as the university actively pronounces on and seeks to remedy social and political problems. Either way, the liberal arts will suffer. I hope they don't, but they may, as in the closing recently of the Honors College at the University of Tulsa. And yet, the students are voracious in their appetite for liberal education. Enrollment in directed studies is soaring. Bastions of liberal education like Yale, Deep Springs, and St. John's College continue to inspire intense devotion. The Catherine Project, which offers free seminars on great books in the St. John's style. I didn't think of myself as plugging the Catherine Project, but it really is great. You should all look this up. The Catherine Project can't keep up with demand. There's some discrepancy between the hand-wringing about the threats to this kind of education and the real passion shown for it by students here and now. I want to leave you with an exemplar of liberal education today, a great teacher, though she died last October, Eva Brann, winner of the National Humanities Medal and the longest-serving tutor and former dean at St. John's College in Annapolis. I met Brann in Ashland, Ohio, where I was teaching as I finished my PhD. I'm embarrassed to say that I took Miss Brann, whom I regarded as one of the more formidable thinkers alive, to McDonald's. She was hungry, and I don't know if anyone's ever been to Ashland, more or less midway between Columbus and Cleveland, but there's not a lot to eat there. Like a kid allowed to order for herself, she made her way to the counter, 90 years old, 5 feet tall, and said, just this, with pleasure, I will have a burger. After she managed to get some food, after she teased me about my visible embarrassment at having brought her to Mickey D's, she asked me a series of questions about my own work, especially about Aristotle's physics and Thucydides' history, questions so perfect as questions that they helped to develop my thinking and writing almost immediately. I experienced her questions as mini earthquakes, but I didn't fall off my chair. The McDonald's didn't crumble. Her wisdom was human wisdom. She was just talking and eating a burger. The incongruity of the situation revealed what an interesting character she was. Humble, yet learned. Playful, yet serious. This is the spirit of liberal education, a topic on which Brann herself wrote repeatedly and brilliantly. So, if you're still interested in liberal education after this talk, go read some Eva Brann, whose approach to liberal education remains very much alive. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Schillinger, for those excellent remarks. We'll now be moving into a brief Q&A session with you all, the audience. So if you have a question, please feel free to raise your hand, and I will walk over to you and make sure to hold on to the microphone while you ask a question. Perfect. He wasn't a plant, I promise.
Well, thank you, Dr. Schillinger, for that wonderful talk. I'm wondering, long term, what do you see as the most pressing challenges facing universities today? Do you think this current period of tension with the government, is this just something that you think is going to blow over, or do you think some long-term change is really needed for higher education?
I'm not sure I'm in the business of predicting or even prescribing, but one thing that I tried to say at the end of the talk is that I think universities and teachers need to explain to their students and to ask them why we're doing what we do. And a program like directed studies is precious, and looking ahead, I want it to exist for decades and decades, and I think it would be good if we paused and said for one another and to one another why this sort of education is a good thing to do. As for where we're going, I don't know. Thank you, Henry.
Hi. I have a question about your second thesis. Forgive me if this is poorly formulated. But you said at the beginning of it that if liberal education does anything to educate the civic mind, it does so incidentally, because the primary aim is to educate the soul. I'm curious about your separation between the two, and how it's possible to educate the mind, or to educate the soul without educating the civic mind, or why those are separate processes at all.
Because the political community can demand a lot of us, because it can demand many things that are unjust. Education for a certain political community has to be relative to that community. So maybe you'd want to say that there's some abstract notion of the good citizen that extends beyond a certain political community. But yeah, I mean, to my mind, inculcating like specifically civic virtues or the right opinions is just a different type of education. It comes closer to indoctrination than it does to philosophic inquiry into the best regime. It's exactly because, someone like Curtis Yarvin, not to mention him now twice in this talk, but what he is assuming, I think, is that there is no truly philosophic inquiry into politics, that it's just, kind of pieties. And that I think is not the case at a place like Yale. Now, I should say, I don't could acting politically, could experience with deliberation and citizenship and organizing also contribute to a liberal education? That, I think, is probably true. And I think Tashroom and I both have in mind a different college, Deep Springs, where the students govern themselves as they read the sorts of books that I love to teach. And it is different there. Like when you read about, when you read Rousseau saying you have to be forced to be free, or that a democracy is only appropriate to, a group of gods. Those words land differently when the students are also legislating and governing themselves. Do you want to respond yet once more?
I think the question about whether or not philosophic inquiry into politics is possible is salient, right? And I guess a way that I would maybe augment my question for what you're responding to is, it's not. I think that you're maybe conflating specific political virtues with civic education in general. I'm thinking about what it is to be a human being, both as an individual and as a social being, right? As a being that is constantly implicated in different kinds of political communities, and whether or not there is some sort of education that comes with that as well, like what it means to be good to others or something along those lines. Yeah.
Yeah. Maybe another thing to say is that genuine philosophic conversation often begins with opinions about politics that have, that are grounded in a specific regime and questions pressing in that regime. So maybe in some situations it might not be bad to do civic education always with leaving open the possibility that you'll kind of move beyond it. I mean, I quoted that passage on liberal education from Aristotle's Politics. It's in the Politics. It's in the last book of the Politics, because for Aristotle, an inquiry into politics is an inquiry into human flourishing itself. That's what politics is for. And so it ends with a conversation about education that isn't strictly political.
Thank you, Professor. So I think you've convinced me about the value of liberal education for certainly the student, and the value of reading great books for the educator and maybe the student as well. What do you think the value of educating is, right? Of liberal education for the educator, leading a seminar versus just reading and writing in solitude?
Yeah, thank you, Avi. Well, to some extent, I view myself as a middleman. I'm just introducing you all to the true educators. When Nietzsche writes that essay about his own education, his educator is Schopenhauer through his writings. So I mean, directed studies has been amazing for me in this respect. It has been a second education. There are, there are some works in the DS H&P, Historical and Political Thought curriculum that I know really, really well, and I guess ostensibly that's why I'm teaching the course. But there are others that I don't know well at all, and that I've loved reading and learning in a serious way for the first time, like Tacitus's Annals. I had never read that book at all before teaching it in directed studies. There's an old joke among professors where someone asks one professor, well, have you read this book? And the professor responds, read it? I haven't even taught it. That's why we teach.
Thank you, Dr. Schillinger, for that amazing talk and very insightful presentation.
Thank you.
I'm curious about, for students who are interested in a liberal education but might not necessarily specialize in humanities or something else, do you see other avenues within even more technical, perhaps utilitarian fields to still take responsibility for gaining a civic education, or sorry, a liberal education? Or is it something that is only most purely acquired within something like humanities?
Yeah, thank you for that question. I mean, on one hand, I guess you'd hope that even those who are going to become doctors and engineers will have read books that can help them to think about, what health is or what technology is. And then, on the other hand, I mean, you're probably right that, and this is related to the way I responded to Tashroom, that liberal education can be supplemented, maybe even completed by, some experience and practical know-how. Yeah, I think that's right. I love this letter that Machiavelli writes to his friend Vittorio. It's very famous. Most of you have probably read it, where, he says that in the evening, he sits down with his old books in Latin, and he puts on his nice clothes, and he has a conversation with Livy. Okay, but before that, during the day, I mean, he's like hunting, he's screaming at people, he's gambling, and the suggestion is that you wouldn't learn everything there is to know about the world or about human beings from Livy. Yeah, there's something to that for sure. I mean, the idea here is not that this is the sum and substance of education. I do think that it's a particularly important kind of education, maybe even the most important kind. But yeah, Aristotle's point, again, is not that you shouldn't learn the useful arts. In fact, he says you should learn some of them. You shouldn't focus on utility to the point that your mind or soul is obsessed with the question of what is useful or how things work. Hi, Wes.
Hi. How long did the professor who died last October live for?
That's a great question. I believe she lived for 95 years, which actually makes, she was a little younger than 90 when I was hanging out with her in Ashland, Ohio. Sorry, Miss Brand, but yeah, she was wonderful. You would have liked her a lot. When I met her at the airport, I was tasked with bringing her back, and I was nervous to do this. This is the sort of person that leaves me starstruck, and she came out of the terminal very slowly, and I tried to take her bag, and she said. And she kind of pulled it back. And I was like, well, why not? I'll put it in the car. And she said, because I don't trust you. Yeah, her writing is truly, for the students in the room, if you want to read one of the most lively, playful, brilliant essayists you've ever read, Eva Brand. You'll also realize that, nothing in here is original.
Thank you, Professor. I'll start by saying I'm very amenable to your theses, inclined even. But I wanted to ask about kind of the utility, practicality point. And I guess along the line of what you think the greatest dangers to the liberal arts education in the future are, where we have a society now where time is money and it seems we have too little of it, and money is money and college is asking for more of it. And I'm wondering if you see us cultivating an environment in which we get to a point where the study of liberal arts is not undesirable, but becomes effectively impossible because it's not practical. We don't do it for practical reasons, which then makes it one of the things that is easy to crowd out.
Yeah, I'm preaching to the choir, and you're also preaching to the choir. I think that's right. The threats to liberal education, as I see them, were in a way embedded in the theses as they were put in the negative. So liberal education shouldn't be made or is threatened in some way by our preoccupation with what is useful or profitable. It's threatened by the politicization of everything. It's threatened by our desire to be specialists and pre-professional, and to be professionals. So much at Yale it seems to be oriented toward the job at the end, and even that fourth one, which was sketchy about how liberal education has to be textual, so that we can kind of shuttle back and forth between our individual thoughts and our conversations among others. I mean, you can imagine all sorts of things that might render us more alone than we've ever been right now. So yeah, all those threats are real. And at the same time, I mean, I do think there's a discrepancy between the discourse and what's happening on the ground in direct. I mean, some people talk to me as if, it's like Elon called Yale the epicenter of the woke hive. I'm going to get this wrong, but there are people just sitting around at Yale, hundreds of us, reading these books, even when we don't have to. I don't know how many reading groups are associated with the new Civic Thought Center, but it's a lot. Yeah.
Thank you. As you were speaking, I was remembering my grandparents and family members talking to me about the importance of a liberal education when I was growing up, bordering on illiberalism. Like, they thought it was so important that it wasn't a point of view that they were suggesting to me, but rather a dogma that they wanted me to accept. And so I was wondering how you handle that with your own students. You obviously think that a liberal education is very important and would want more students to join directed studies. Yeah. So how do you handle that? And do you think there's any conflict with trying to convince people of the importance of a liberal education? Is there a conflict between that and the fact of a liberal education in itself?
Yeah, thank you, Jesse. I mean, my authority on liberal education in the first section of the talk was Aristotle. I mean, he's no liberal, and yeah, in fact, when he says, when he's talking about things that are free, using a Greek word, I mean, you might say that the free in the first place refers to people who are free rather than enslaved, or effectively enslaved because they have to labor to make money. So the roots of liberal education are not in any way identical with political liberalism. So it's not surprising that, like, the spirit might be different. Yeah, I mean, to my mind, liberal education has to go beyond like a liberal marketplace of ideas, I mean, in the first place, because it's deadly serious. Like, I feel like my students and I are really trying to understand the highest things and trying to get it right, because we want to know, and for our own lives. And yeah, it can't be kind of blinkered by any sort of liberal ideas of toleration. All of that is like stuff that we read and question in light of what we've read previously. Like, I would say a main question of directed studies is, is freedom really a higher good than virtue? Across the 2 semesters, that's an important question. Thanks.
We should have time for 1 to 2 final questions.
Well, congratulations and thank you for this.
Thanks.
I just wanted to ask about playfulness. You mentioned playfulness a couple times,
Oh, yeah.
and this feels like serious work a lot of the time, and I think many people talk about it as if it's very serious work, but
Yeah.
I think playfulness is important, and I'd love to hear what being playful looks like here to you and why we should do it.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, I think it's serious, but it's also pleasant, right? I mean, that's why many of us, do it, even when we don't have to. It also, I mean, again, I think like Bran is such a good example. I mean, she has so many languages. She's read everything. She teaches at St. John's and can, talk about calculus just as well as she can talk about Plato. But because, she's read so much and tried so hard, like the books have cut her down to size. It's not, I don't know, it's not as if you like spend an afternoon reading Hegel to teach it and you're like, well, yeah, I got it now. This is going to be easy, and it's just one more accomplishment for me. It's like, no, I don't understand any of this. Yeah, so I think playfulness is important, I think, because it's connected to that spirit of humility. That's what I'd say. Thank you all.
When you say great books, what do you mean by that? Are modern things great?
Yeah, I was afraid of this question. Yeah, I was afraid. But Tiana has the standing to ask it, because some of us have noticed that the thing that the 3 winners of this award who teach in Yale College have in common is that Tiana has taken multiple classes with all. So it's Tiana's award to bestow. Yeah, what makes a book great? I mean, one has to start somewhere, and as I said, when people ask me why the great books, sometimes I just say, maybe glibly, because I'm going to die. Like, I want to read Plato and Shakespeare and Jane Austen. I mean, I just want to read the good stuff and try to understand it. The good stuff has to be contested. I don't think you can simply accept like what the canon gives you. But that's part of the fun too. I mean, in directed studies, as a faculty, we try to hash this out every year, and it's contentious. So that's a non-answer, but you can decide for yourself, Tiana.
Well, I think that will be an excellent way to end this evening. Dr. Schillinger, thank you again for your remarks and for the lecture that you gave. If I may just add a personal word, my first Buckley event that I ever attended was actually the first Lux et Veritas faculty prize that was awarded. And I knew as soon as I sat right about where Avi and Max are, that I would, want to stay involved with the organization. And so I have gone to every Lux et Veritas faculty prize that's been awarded over the last 4 years. And I really do think that it's one of the best things that Buckley as an organization does to continue to fulfill its mission of promoting freedom of speech and intellectual diversity on campus. And I have no doubt that, Dr. Schillinger, you are continuing that legacy very strongly. So thank you to the Buckley Institute, and thank you, Dr. Schillinger.
Thank you all. I appreciate it. Thank you.
That concludes the event. If you all would like to join us, we will have some refreshments in the back. I think it's also traditional for former students of the winner of the prize to have a photo up front if you are comfortable or willing. So if anybody in here has taken a class with Dr. Schillinger before, you are more than welcome to come up and give your congratulations and a thumbs up. So thank you all very much for coming.